A raging river. A desperate cry. A baby Mustang fighting for its very life. When a man stumbled upon this heart-stopping scene, he didn't hesitate. He acted. What happened next would transform not just the foal's life, but his own, in ways he never imagined. This is a powerful story of courage, survival, and an unbreakable bond that will leave you in awe. Stay with us to witness a journey that shows how even the smallest acts of bravery can lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. Mark Callahan adjusted his worn cowboy hat to shield his eyes from the early morning sun as he walked along the edge of the Snake River. The recent storm had turned the normally calm waters into a roaring torrent, carrying debris downstream. Mark was no stranger to floods in these parts, but something about this morning felt off, a sense of unease he couldn't shake. The rushing sound of the water filled the air, but suddenly, it was interrupted by something unusual. A faint, sharp cry cut through the noise. It sounded like an animal in distress. Mark stopped in his tracks, tilting his head and straining his ears to catch the sound again. There it was, louder and more desperate this time. Mark's heart quickened as he followed the noise, pushing through the thick brush along the riverbank. His breath caught when he saw the source of the cry. A small, helpless Mustang foal was caught in the raging current, struggling to keep its head above water. The golden light of dawn spilled over the Colorado plains, casting a warm glow across the turbulent Snake River. Mark, a rancher in his early 40s, surveyed the storm's aftermath as he walked along the muddy bank. His boots crunched against wet gravel as he scanned the debris floating by, broken branches, clumps of grass, and even pieces of fencing from his property. Adjusting his hat against the sun's glare, he muttered, "Storm didn't hold back this time." For Mark, checking the river after a heavy rain was routine. Over the years, he'd grown used to the damage storms left behind. But this morning felt different. Unease gnawed at him as he continued along the bank. Then, the cry stopped him cold. It was faint at first, almost drowned out by the roaring river, but it was there, a sharp, desperate sound. He froze, listening. The cry came again, more urgent this time. "What the hell was that?" he murmured, his pulse racing. Stepping closer to the river, Mark's boots sank into the muddy ground. His eyes searched the water until he spotted movement, a small, dark shape bobbing in the current. His breath hitched. It wasn't debris. It was alive. Mark pushed through the brush, his heart pounding. The shape came into focus, a tiny chestnut-colored Mustang foal, just a few months old. The little creature flailed its legs desperately, barely managing to keep its head above water. "Damn it," Mark muttered, shrugging off his jacket and boots. Without hesitation, he waded into the freezing water. The icy current was stronger than he'd expected, nearly knocking him off his feet. His jeans soaked through instantly, but he pressed forward. "Hold on, little guy," he shouted, though the foal likely couldn't hear him over the river's roar. The foal let out another desperate cry, its wide, terrified eyes locking onto Mark as it fought to stay afloat. Each step was a battle against the relentless current. The river seemed determined to drag the foal away, but Mark pushed on. When he was close enough, he reached out and grabbed the foal's neck. The animal thrashed wildly, its panic growing. "Easy, easy," Mark said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I've got you." Wrapping his arm around the foal's chest, he gripped it tightly and began the slow, grueling journey back to the shore. The weight of the foal, combined with the force of the current, made every step feel like a mile. When Mark finally reached the riverbank, he collapsed onto the muddy ground, cradling the foal in his arms. Both of them were soaked and shivering, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The foal, now out of danger, stopped thrashing. Its small body trembled against Mark's chest, its dark eyes blinking up at him. "You're safe now," Mark whispered, his voice hoarse. "I've got you." He looked the foal over, his heart sinking as he took in its condition. Its legs were scraped and bleeding, likely from being dragged along the rocks. Its coat was matted with mud and debris, and it was painfully thin, its ribs clearly visible under its damp fur. "Where did you come from?" Mark asked softly, though he didn't expect an answer. He glanced around but saw no sign of other horses. No herd, no mother. The foal let out a soft whimper, its head drooping against his arm. "All right, kid," Mark said, groaning as he pushed himself to his feet. "Let's get you out of here." Carrying the foal back to his truck was no easy task. The little Mustang was heavier than it looked, and Mark's muscles ached from his struggle in the river. But he pressed on, determined to get the foal to safety. When he reached the truck, he gently placed the foal in the bed, lining it with an old blanket he kept for emergencies. The foal curled up, exhausted, and closed its eyes. Mark climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. As he drove back to his ranch, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The foal lay motionless, but it was breathing. "You're a tough one," Mark muttered, "but we'll get you fixed up. I promise." By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows over the barn and paddocks. Mark parked the truck near the barn and climbed out, carefully lifting the foal from the truck bed. As he carried it inside, a sense of responsibility weighed heavily on him. This wasn't just about saving an animal. It was about giving it a real chance to live. And something told Mark that this little foal's story was far from over. The foal lay motionless on the soft hay in Mark's barn, its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Mark knelt beside it, gently wiping away the mud and debris clinging to its chestnut coat with a damp cloth. Each stroke revealed more cuts and scrapes. None seemed life-threatening, but it was clear the small Mustang had been through hell. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Mark murmured, his voice steady but soft. Carefully, he examined the foal's legs, noticing deep scrapes along its knees and swelling in one of its hind legs. It was too soon to tell if the injury would heal properly, but Mark wasn't about to let doubt creep in now. Standing up, he walked to the corner of the barn where he kept a small supply of veterinary tools. The local vet was miles away, and without a way to contact him immediately, Mark had to do what he could. Grabbing a roll of bandages, a bottle of antiseptic, and some ointment, he returned to the foal's side. "This might sting a little," he said gently, as though the foal could understand. The small horse flinched when the antiseptic touched its wounds, letting out a weak cry, but Mark's steady hand never faltered. Once the injuries were cleaned and wrapped, he sat back and let out a long breath. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so drained, not physically, but emotionally. There was something about this little horse, something he couldn't quite put into words. "Let's get you some water," he said, filling a small bucket and placing it near the foal's head. Kneeling again, he coaxed the foal to drink by gently stroking its neck. After a few moments, the Mustang's dark eyes fluttered open, and it took a hesitant sip. "That's it, kid. One step at a time," Mark said, a faint smile crossing his face. The day passed slowly. Mark checked on the foal every hour, making sure it was comfortable and hydrated. He brought in a bale of fresh hay, hoping the foal might feel strong enough to eat, but it was still too weak to do more than occasionally lift its head. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the ranch in gold and orange hues, Mark sat outside the barn with his elbows resting on his knees. He gazed out at the open fields, the wind rustling through the tall grass. His mind wandered back to the storm and the river, replaying the moment he'd seen the foal struggling in the water. "Where did you come from?" he wondered aloud, as if the foal might somehow answer. Mustangs weren't uncommon in the area, but it was rare to see one so young and alone, without a herd or a mother. The next morning, Mark was awakened by a faint sound coming from the barn. He quickly threw on his jacket and boots, hurrying outside. As he stepped into the barn, the sight before him made his chest tighten. The foal was standing. Its legs trembled under its weight, but it was upright. Its head lifted as it sniffed the air. Mark's face broke into a wide grin. "Well, look at you," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I knew you had some fight in you." Moving slowly to avoid startling the foal, Mark stepped closer. The foal watched him intently, its dark eyes wary but calm. When Mark reached out his hand, the foal didn't shy away. Instead, it leaned forward slightly, its nose brushing against his palm. Mark's grin widened. "We're going to get through this, little one." Over the next few days, Mark worked tirelessly to help the foal regain its strength. He fed it small portions of oats and hay, gradually increasing the amount as its appetite returned. He cleaned and rewrapped its bandages daily, and each time, the foal seemed to trust him a little more. By then, the foal had earned a name, River, a nod to the place where their journey began. "You've got the spirit of the river in you," Mark told River one evening as they stood outside the barn. The foal, now strong enough to walk short distances, nickered softly in response. Despite the progress, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that River's story wasn't finished. He'd seen wild Mustangs before, untamed creatures roaming the plains in tight-knit herds, fiercely loyal to one another. The idea that River had been separated from its family gnawed at him. One afternoon, Mark saddled his horse, Dakota, and set out to explore the surrounding area. Riding along the riverbank, his eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of a herd. If River's family was out there, Mark was determined to find them. However, after hours of riding and searching, his efforts proved fruitless. Shoulders heavy with disappointment, Mark returned to the ranch. As he dismounted Dakota and walked back to the barn, River greeted him with a soft nicker, leaning its small frame against the fence. Mark crouched beside the foal, running a hand along its neck. "Looks like it's just you and me for now, kid," he said. River nudged him gently, and for a moment, Mark felt a wave of peace wash over him. Whatever the future held, he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let River face it alone. The days passed in a steady rhythm as Mark and River settled into a routine. Each morning, Mark would check River's injuries, clean the wounds, and rewrap the bandages. The swelling in River's leg began to go down, and the cuts were healing nicely. With each passing day, River's strength returned, and with it came a spark of energy that breathed new life into the barn. One morning, as Mark entered the barn with a bucket of oats, he found River standing in the middle of the stall, its ears pricked forward and dark eyes watching him expectantly. "Well, someone's feeling better," Mark chuckled, setting the bucket down. River took a few hesitant steps toward him, its movements still a bit unsteady but full of determination. Mark held out his hand, letting the foal sniff his palm before giving its neck a gentle pat. "You're a tough little one, aren't you?" he said. River nickered softly, a sound that filled Mark's chest with pride. As the days turned into weeks, River grew stronger. Its coat regained its shine, and its once thin frame began to fill out. Mark started taking River outside the barn, letting it explore the paddock and feel the grass beneath its hooves. At first, River was cautious, staying close to Mark as they walked. But soon, its natural curiosity took over. River began trotting around the paddock, sniffing at the fence posts and nibbling on tall grass. Mark watched with a smile, leaning against the fence. "That's it, kid. Get a feel for the world again." One afternoon, as Mark worked on repairing a section of the paddock fence, he noticed River watching him intently. The foal stood a few feet away, its head tilted as if trying to understand what he was doing. "You thinking about lending a hand?" Mark teased, wiping the sweat from his brow. River took a step closer, then another, until it stood right beside him. Mark laughed, patting the foal's neck. "You're something else, you know that?" The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Mark had always loved animals, but there was something special about River. The foal's resilience and trust had touched him in ways he hadn't expected. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark sat on the porch of his house with a cup of coffee in hand. River grazed in the paddock, its chestnut coat glowing in the golden light. Mark's thoughts drifted back to the day he had pulled the foal from the river. At the time, he had seen it as a simple act of kindness, something anyone would have done. But now he realized it was more than that. Saving River had given him purpose, a reason to get up each morning. "You saved me as much as I saved you," Mark murmured, his gaze fixed on the foal. As River continued to grow stronger, Mark decided it was time to take the next step in its recovery. He wanted to introduce River to the open fields beyond the paddock and let it experience the freedom it had been denied. One crisp morning, Mark led River out of the paddock and into the wide expanse of his property. The foal hesitated at first, its ears flicking back and forth as it took in the unfamiliar surroundings. "It's okay," Mark said, giving the lead rope a gentle tug. I'm right here. With a deep breath, River stepped forward, its hooves sinking into the soft grass. Its dark eyes widened as it took in the vastness of the open field. After a moment of hesitation, it broke into a tentative trot. Mark laughed, jogging to keep up. There you go, kid. That's what freedom feels like. With each outing, River's confidence grew. It began running farther, testing its speed and strength as it explored the fields. Mark often found himself standing in awe, watching the foal's transformation. The once fragile creature he had pulled from the river was now full of life and energy, its spirit unbroken despite everything it had endured. One evening, as Mark and River returned to the barn after a long day in the fields, he heard something unusual, a faint sound carried on the wind. It was a distant whinny. River's ears perked up, and it let out a soft nicker in response. Mark's heart raced. Could it be? The next morning, Mark saddled Dakota and set out with River in tow. The sound from the previous night had sparked a glimmer of hope. If there were other Mustangs nearby, there was a chance they could be River's family. They rode for hours, following the river upstream. The landscape grew wilder, with rocky outcrops and dense thickets lining the banks. River walked steadily beside Dakota, its movements confident and sure. As they rounded a bend, Mark's breath caught. Mark spotted movement in the distance. A herd of Mustangs grazing near the water's edge, their coats gleaming under the bright sunlight. His breath caught in his throat. Could this be it? Could they be River's family? He slowed Dakota to a halt, his heart pounding as he took in the majestic sight. The Mustangs moved in unison, heads dipping to graze and lifting again to scan their surroundings. Their powerful, untamed presence was mesmerizing, a vivid reminder of what River had lost and what the foal might now regain. Beside him, River froze. Its ears flicked forward, nostrils flaring as it let out a soft nicker. The foal's small frame trembled with a mix of excitement and hesitation. Mark leaned down, gently patting Dakota's neck before glancing at River. You recognize them, don't you? He murmured, his voice tinged with both hope and sadness. Mark dismounted and crouched beside River, loosening the lead rope to give the foal more freedom. All right, kid, he said softly. If this is your family, now's the time to find out. River hesitated, sniffing the air as if to confirm what its heart already seemed to know. Suddenly, one of the Mustangs, a large chestnut mare, lifted her head, her ears swiveling toward them. She let out a sharp whinny, and the entire herd froze, their alert eyes locking onto River. Mark held his breath, his hand resting on Dakota's reins. The mare stepped forward cautiously, her movements deliberate and filled with purpose. River responded with a louder, more urgent nicker, and the mare answered with a deep, resonant whinny. For a moment, they simply stood there, their gazes locked as if exchanging something unspoken. Then, to Mark's astonishment, River broke into a run. Though the foal's steps were still slightly unsteady, there was a fierce determination in every movement as it crossed the distance toward the herd. Mark's chest swelled with emotion as the mare trotted to meet River, her nostrils flaring as she sniffed the foal. The rest of the herd watched from a distance, their bodies tense but calm, as if waiting for confirmation. The mare nuzzled River gently, her movements careful and filled with recognition. Slowly, the herd began to relax. Several Mustangs stepped forward, each taking a moment to sniff River and welcome it into their fold. Mark stayed where he was, not wanting to disrupt the reunion. He felt a lump rise in his throat as he watched River's nervous energy give way to joy. The foal moved with newfound ease among the Mustangs, its posture shifting from hesitant to assured. This is where you belong, Mark whispered, a bittersweet smile on his face. After several minutes, Mark began to back away, leading Dakota toward the edge of the clearing. He knew it was time to let River go, but the thought of leaving the foal behind pulled painfully at his heart. Over the weeks they had spent together, River had become more than just a rescue. River was family. As Mark mounted Dakota and turned to leave, River turned too. The foal let out a sharp whinny, its dark eyes locking onto Mark. Mark's chest tightened. He tipped his hat, his voice soft but steady. It's okay, kid. You're home now. But River didn't move. Instead, the foal trotted back toward him, stopping just a few feet away. The mare followed, her head tilting as she watched the interaction. Mark dismounted once more, crouching to meet River at eye level. "What is it?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. River nuzzled his chest, a gesture filled with trust and gratitude. Mark placed a hand on the foal's neck, his fingers brushing against its soft coat. "You'll be all right," he said, his voice steady despite the tears welling in his eyes. "You've got a whole family now." The mare stepped closer, her calm presence a reassurance. River hesitated for a moment longer, then turned back toward her, as if understanding what needed to happen next. Mark stood and watched as River rejoined the herd, his heart heavy but full. The foal moved among the Mustangs with growing confidence, its place among them becoming clearer with every step. When the herd finally began to move away, Mark mounted Dakota again. He sat silently, his gaze fixed on River until the foal disappeared into the distance. "You did good, kid," he murmured, turning Dakota toward home. "You did real good." That evening, Mark sat on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand, the barn feeling emptier without River's presence. But there was a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. He thought back to the journey they had shared. The moment he had pulled River from the raging river, the countless hours spent nursing the foal back to health, and the bond they had built along the way. River had found a family, but Mark knew the foal would always hold a special place in his heart. In the days that followed, the ranch felt quieter. The absence of River's eager nicker and curious glances left a void in Mark's routine. Yet, as he walked past the empty paddock each morning, he couldn't help but smile. River was free, and for Mark, that was enough. Mark shook his head as he leaned against the fence, staring out at the open fields. "You did the right thing," he told himself, though the words felt hollow. River was where he belonged, running free with his family, but part of Mark wished he could have held on just a little longer. The days at the ranch seemed quieter without River. Each morning, as Mark passed the empty paddock, he felt a pang of loss. The foal's playful energy and curious nicker had filled the space with life, and now, the stillness was a bittersweet reminder of their time together. One afternoon, as Mark worked on repairing a section of the paddock fence, a faint sound reached his ears, the rhythmic drumming of hoofbeats in the distance. He froze, his heart leaping. For a fleeting moment, he thought it might be River. Mark straightened, straining to listen. The sound grew louder, but it was coming from the far side of the property. Curiosity piqued. Mark climbed onto Dakota and urged the horse toward the noise. As he approached the riverbank, the golden afternoon light bathed the landscape in a warm glow. There, in the distance, was the Mustang herd. They grazed peacefully near the water, their movements fluid and calm. Among them, Mark's gaze locked onto a familiar figure, River. The foal stood close to a chestnut mare, her posture protective yet gentle. Mark's heart swelled with a mix of pride and sadness. River looked strong, his coat gleaming in the sunlight, his movements filled with a confidence that had been absent when Mark first found him. The transformation was undeniable. Mark stayed where he was, watching silently from the edge of the clearing. River was no longer the weak, trembling creature he had pulled from the river. He had found his place in the world, and seeing him thrive filled Mark with a sense of fulfillment. But then, something unexpected happened. River lifted his head, his dark eyes scanning the horizon. His gaze locked onto Mark, and the foal let out a soft whinny. Without hesitation, River began trotting toward him, leaving the safety of the herd behind. Mark dismounted Dakota, his heart pounding as River approached. The foal stopped a few feet away, their eyes meeting in a moment of quiet recognition. It was as if no time had passed, as though they were back at the ranch, just the two of them. "You've got a good thing going here, kid," Mark said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to come back to me." But River took another step forward, nuzzling Mark's hand. The gesture was simple yet profound, a silent acknowledgement of their bond and everything they had been through together. Mark ran his hand along River's neck, feeling the warmth of the foal's coat beneath his fingers. "You've come a long way," he murmured, his voice catching. "And I'm proud of you." After a few moments, River stepped back, his gaze lingering on Mark before turning toward the herd. The chestnut mare trotted forward to meet him, nuzzling the foal with gentle reassurance. The herd moved as one, fluid and graceful, as they resumed their grazing along the riverbank. Mark stood there, watching as River rejoined his family. He didn't move until the herd disappeared into the distance, their forms blending into the golden light of the setting sun. As Mark mounted Dakota and rode back to the ranch, a sense of peace settled over him. River had found his place, and Mark knew he had done everything he could to give the foal a second chance at life. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark sat on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. The air was cool, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. He thought about River, about the bond they had shared and the lessons the foal had taught him. Saving River had been more than an act of kindness. It had been a reminder of resilience, of finding strength in the face of adversity, and of the unbreakable connection between man and nature. Those lessons would stay with Mark for the rest of his life. As the first stars began to appear in the night sky, Mark smiled to himself. River was gone, but the memories they had created would remain etched in his heart. Somewhere out there, River was running free, and that was all Mark needed to know. In the weeks that followed, the ranch became a place of quiet reflection. Though the paddock stood empty, Mark often lingered by its gate, lost in thought. Each time he passed the riverbank, he couldn't help but think of how a chance encounter had changed both their lives forever. River was a reminder that sometimes, letting go was the greatest act of love. One afternoon, as Mark worked in the barn repairing a broken gate, he noticed a truck pulling into the driveway. The logo on the side of the vehicle read Wild Mustang Preservation Alliance in bold green letters. Stepping out was a woman in her late 30s, her face framed by the brim of a wide-brimmed hat. She approached with a confident stride, extending her hand. "You must be Mark," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Claire Reynolds, a conservationist with the Alliance. I've heard about what you did for River. Your story is exactly the kind of dedication we're looking for." Mark shook her hand, curiosity mingling with skepticism. "What can I do for you?" he asked. Claire explained the Alliance's mission to protect wild Mustangs from illegal trapping and displacement. They were working to establish a network of sanctuaries where the horses could roam freely, shielded from the growing threats of land development and poaching. "We need someone like you," Claire said. "Someone who understands these animals and has the patience and grit to help us build something lasting." Mark hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the empty paddock. The ranch was his home, his legacy. Leaving it felt unthinkable. But as Claire spoke of the challenges the Mustangs faced, Mark felt a familiar sense of purpose stirring within him. He thought of River, the little foal he had saved against all odds, and of the countless other horses who might not be as lucky. Finally, he nodded, his voice steady with determination. "I'll do it, whatever it takes." The transition wasn't easy. Mark spent the following weeks preparing the ranch for his absence, entrusting it to a neighbor he knew could keep things running smoothly. Packing his belongings felt bittersweet, but with each item, he reminded himself of the greater purpose he was stepping into. Once on the road with Claire and her team, Mark's world expanded in ways he hadn't imagined. They traveled across vast plains and rolling hills, documenting wild herds, dismantling illegal traps, and advocating for stronger protections in government hearings. Each foal running beside its mother reminded Mark of River, of the resilience he had witnessed, and the trust that had bridged their lives. Months later, Mark found himself standing on the edge of a newly established sanctuary, one of the largest safe zones the Alliance had created. The land stretched endlessly, a patchwork of rolling hills, grassy plains, and shaded groves. Herds of Mustangs roamed freely, their movements a celebration of the untamed beauty they represented. As Mark scanned the horizon, his eyes caught sight of a familiar figure. At the edge of a grove stood a young chestnut horse, its coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. Mark's heart skipped a beat as he recognized River, now stronger and more confident than ever. River lifted his head, his ears flicking forward as he spotted Mark. For a moment, their gazes locked, the connection as strong as it had ever been. Then, with a flick of his tail, River trotted back toward the herd, disappearing into the sea of horses. Mark smiled, a deep sense of fulfillment washing over him. River was free, just as he was meant to be, and though their paths had diverged, their bond would always remain. Back at the Alliance headquarters that evening, Mark sat with Claire and the team, recounting their progress. The room buzzed with hope and determination, each voice a testament to the work they were doing. "You've done something incredible," Claire said, turning to Mark. "River's story has inspired so many people to join this fight." Mark nodded, his thoughts drifting back to the little foal by the river. "I didn't just save him," he said quietly. "He saved me too." Years passed, and Mark's work with the Wild Mustang Preservation Alliance became a lifelong mission. Together with his team, he helped establish sanctuaries across the country, giving wild Mustangs a fighting chance to thrive. On one visit to a sanctuary, Mark found himself leaning against a fence, watching the herds roam free. In the distance, a chestnut Mustang with a distinctive white mark on its chest caught his eye. River. The horse stood at the edge of the herd, his head held high, a symbol of resilience and freedom. Mark felt a wave of pride and peace wash over him. River wasn't just surviving. He was leading, inspiring the next generation of Mustangs. As Mark turned to leave, he glanced back one last time. River lifted his head, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. It was as if the Mustang was saying, "Thank you." Mark tipped his hat and smiled. "Run free, kid." As he walked away, Mark reflected on the journey they had shared. River's story was proof that even the smallest act of kindness could ripple outward, creating change far beyond what anyone could imagine. And somewhere, in the vastness of the open plains, River continued to run free, a living reminder of the power of trust, compassion, and the courage to take a leap of faith. As you finish watching River's incredible journey, take a moment to reflect on the power of compassion, resilience, and the bonds we share with the world around us. Every small act of kindness, like Mark's decision to save River, has the potential to create ripples that change lives. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the beauty of hope and second chances, subscribe to our channel and join our community. By subscribing, you're not just staying connected. You're helping us spread stories that inspire change and celebrate the extraordinary connections we share with nature. Tell us in the comments, what's one act of kindness that changed your life or someone else's? We'd love to hear your story. And here's a question for you. If you were in Mark's shoes, would you have been able to let River go? Why or why not? Share your thoughts below. If this story moved you, please like this video to help more people see it, and to honor River's legacy of freedom and resilience. Every click, every comment, every share helps us grow this community and keep these stories alive. So hit that subscribe button, and let's keep the spirit of River's journey running free together. Thank you for being part of this story.